Hello, and thank you for joining us on Conversations with Barbara. I'm Barbara Canelopoulos. My guest today is Rachel Lovett. She is the new Executive Director of Falmouth Museums on the Green. Thank you for joining us, Rachel. Welcome to Falmouth, which is somewhat belated because I think you're already on the job. I think you began a few months ago.
Yes, that's right, Barbara. Happy to be here. I started on July 5th.
Yes. And we have an exhibit coming up. Tell us something about the Zoom exhibit that we think that viewers really should mark their calendars and register for it. And it also is something that tells us about your past experience in Annapolis, where you were involved in curating exhibits.
Yes, so I was the curator and assistant director of the historic Hammond Harwood House in Annapolis, Maryland for the last 8 years, and I still have ties to Maryland, and I am doing a lecture, a curatorial lecture on November 8th, and it is how I designed my latest exhibition, which is Ambition, Charles Willson Peale in Annapolis. There is a link on Falmouth Museums on the Green's website to the exhibition, to the curator's lecture, and after it is recorded on the 8th, there'll also be a link so people can watch it even after the 8th.
Oh, great. That'll be great. And we want to be sure that viewers have this, your website on the screen so that they can know and really just go to the website to get this information that you've just spoken about. And so that's going to be on Zoom.
Yes, it'll be on Zoom on Tuesday, November 8th at 3 p.m. And again, the recording will be available afterwards. Right. And this is an exhibition I did at my former institution, but I think people can get a great overview of my style and also how one designs an exhibition, kind of go behind the scenes in that capacity.
Viewers might be interested in knowing what's involved when you are a curator. I know I found it interesting that the word curate goes all the way back to Middle English, referring to a keeper or someone who has care of a guardian, so that in fact it's perhaps not a sacred duty, but to see that a exhibit and artifacts do not perish, you're guarding them, and also I should say probably doing some interpreting of the material. Absolutely.
So how one becomes a curator at an institution, a lot of schooling, grad school, and so forth. And then it comes down to coming up with a big idea. And this big idea serves as what you want your audience to walk away from and what, essentially what you want them to learn after visiting your exhibition. The way I start with an exhibition is always looking at the permanent collection and then designing out from there. You look at the big concept, and then you look at what loans you might need, the resources, the design aspect. There's a lot that goes into creating an exhibition. An exhibition is usually 2 years or less. Well, an exhibit is generally more than that, 5 years. So exhibitions versus exhibits are essentially two different things, but it's museum speak.
It is, but it's worth knowing about.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know. I had no idea that, that there's takes so much time. Of course, the research is time-consuming.
Right, and it goes back to your idea of interpreting it for the public. So I could research a topic for, say, 100 hours, and then it comes down to how do you curate this, how do you present it to the public, and so hundreds of hours of worth of research may be just a few hundred words, and so it's taking a rather complex topic and making it into a digestible form for the general public.
Right. It sounds like interesting work and lots of discoveries that you have a chance to make. And tell us about the painter, just briefly, so to give people an idea of what this lecture is going to be about. The painter, and you use the word ambition. Something about him that perhaps that's the concept that ties the the lecture together.
It certainly does. So at my former institution, they had a large body of work by the artist Charles Willson Peale, who lived from 1741 to 1827, 86 years. And Peale, he grew up in Annapolis, Maryland, and that's why the institution has a large body of his works. He was born in rather humble circumstances, the son of a disgraced school teacher, and he rose up to be one of the biggest trendsetters in early America. He had a career as a saddle maker in Annapolis. Then he was funded by a group of local patrons to go study in England with Benjamin West, who was a famed American-born painter who became core painter to the king during the American Revolution, actually. And Peale studied in England and then came back to Annapolis, had a pretty prolific career, ended up moving up to Philadelphia. He moved to Philadelphia on the eve of the American Revolution. He was friends with George Washington, and Peale is known as the painter of the American Revolution.
Really?
And he's poised to do that because he not only painted the Revolution, he fought in it, which is pretty amazing. He then, after the war, started a museum in Philadelphia, and Peale essentially is one of the earliest American trendsetters that existed in this time period. He kind of came up with this idea of a self-made man and American identity as we know it today. And so this ambition drove him throughout his life. He taught his brother James how to paint, his nieces, who were some of the first professional women painters in America, his sons, who he named Rubens and Raffaele, and all these names after painters, of course. And so he is the patriarch of the Peale family. So I spent several years of my life researching the Peale family, so it's going to be an interesting lecture, and I think people will get a real flavor of my style that I'm bringing here to Falmouth.
And I think it's wonderful that those of us who just didn't know about this individual, who really was so important, thanks to your research, we're going to be familiar with that name.
Yes, yes. Right, I suppose he spent some time in Boston, actually. He trained with John Singleton Copley, who people up here might be more familiar with.
Yes,
for 3 months, but he is more Philadelphia and Maryland based, so people up here may not recognize his name.
And so let's talk about some of the other programs that the museums on the Green are offering. We have lots of people who are new to Falmouth and may not know that there are walks that people can sign on. There's the Hallett Barn in addition to the other buildings. And so what right now can our viewers check on by looking at the website and sign on for, say, for example, a walk? One of them, I think, that I caught my attention was a walk that is, I think, on Locust Street called Grave Undertakings.
Yeah, we have a number of wonderful walks in downtown Falmouth, and including the cemetery. And I actually did my graduate work through the Harvard Museum Studies program, and my focus was cemetery interpretation.
Oh, really?
So it's a nice mix that the society was already doing cemetery walks, which is great. We're going to have a series of winter walks throughout, obviously, the winter, and these are going to be free to our membership and then pretty low cost to the community. So people can always sign up to become a member to get all these free walks. And we're going to be doing a couple of them a month, January, February, and March. The museum is technically closed to the general public for normal operating hours, but we are going to have winter hours on Saturdays in our Conant House, which has our exhibit galleries. We're also coming up with a winter lecture series, so that'll also be very interesting. The way that I look at designing programs, I'm very mission focused, and so all of the programming that I'm designing has to somehow relate back to Falmouth.
Well, let's talk about that, your view of what the mission is of the Falmouth Museums on the Green. How do you see their mission?
Yeah, well, their mission, of course, is to protect and preserve local history here in Falmouth. And preserving local history, I think it's something, you know, really powerful, where if someone learns a story, they're able to look at their community in a completely new light. We had this one walking tour this past fall called Scandals on Main Street, and that certainly changed the way people looked on Main Street. So I think mission is really important into tying to everything we do. You need to realize that, you know, the power of place is something that really makes a community a community. So that those stories are really powerful. I think object-based learning is also really interesting, where we use primary sources, objects, archives to tell these stories. Right. You know, there's a wonderful quote by an art historian, Kenneth Clark, and it essentially says, you know, would you believe a lecture about a building, or would you believe the building itself? And sometimes you have to let objects speak for themselves.
Yes, yes, yes. So you are a curator and a storyteller.
Yes, yeah, it runs in the family. My mother's a professional storyteller on the South Shore, and I think I got into the storytelling business from a young age, for sure.
Yes, and there are so many stories. Speaking of stories, I've enjoyed checking on the museum's website and reading about untold stories.
Yes.
I'm not so sure they're totally untold, but they were so interesting.
Yeah, we're really blessed to have Meg Costello as our research manager, and I believe she's been with us since 2010, and she is essentially the keeper of the town's history. Her mind is a wonderful database, and I hope people in town will go to Meg at the archives if they have any questions or want to see old photographs. She is a true resource, and she writes all of the untold tales.
Yes, yes. If somebody has a research project, are they free to use some of the archives?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that goes back to the heart of our mission, which of course is, you know, local history, and our archives are definitely available and free and open to the public. All they have to do is just make an appointment with Meg, and she'll research the topic and bring pictures or whatever is related to your topic.
Help.
She will.
Oh, that's great.
And you know, Falmouth is really lucky to have a historical society that does have these resources. You know, some other places around the country, around the world, don't have that. And so I hope that people here realize, you know, what an important resource it really is, and how fortunate they are to have it.
And does you have a strong link with the schools? I'm thinking now of students who might have an idea about a topic that they want to write about for a history class, and maybe use the archives. So do our school department know that?
Yeah, we have several ties with the schools, one of which our secretary of our board is a history teacher here in Falmouth, and so that's really lovely connection as well. But we do free field trips for the schools, and whenever they ask us, and we try to make anything work. We had a kind of an ad hoc 7th grade class come and visit us, and we pulled our resources together and we made that happen. We also do a 3rd grade program every year where they come and spend the whole day at the Historical Society.
That reminds me, wasn't there a recent Halloween party? Or
yes.
Tell us about that.
Sure, sure. So since I've come on board, I've started some new programming, and 2 new programs for October. One of them was called Sin, Sips, and Secrets, and that was a tour through the Wicks house where we talked about some of the more nefarious stories of Falmouth's past, and that was for adults. And then we had Wicked at Wicks, and that was a really fun program for families, and there was trick-or-treating around our historic campus. And at every different station, they learned a different Halloween story about Falmouth's past, and of which there were many in the 20th century.
Yes, yes. And all that information was available in the archives?
It was, and Meg was able to pull all of that out of the archives. It was really a very cool moment to read all that research. Yeah.
Now, how about links? We spoke about links to the school. I think that's really, really wonderful for a wonderful opportunity for students. But how about links to other institutions in Falmouth, the library, the other museums?
Yeah. Well, I had a great conversation actually just this morning with Neighborhood Falmouth and John McDonough, their executive director. And in that conversation, I bounced the idea of a program called I Remember When, and looking at specifically the 20th century and involving some of their members in having dialogue, having an interview essentially to talk about what they remember during the 20th century, what stores were here, memories, and then recording it, and maybe even involving some high school students. It might be very interesting.
Very nice. Yes, change. Everything is in flux. So these what was, the way things were, passes so quickly. It's very nice to have the opportunity to stop everything and have a look at how things have changed.
Yes, yes. And I think in the digital age, it's great to have the ability to record things and to catch people on interview, and that'd be great to have. In addition to that, I've had a recent conversation with the Cape Cod Cape Verdean Museum about partnerships, and we're thinking about some type of programming for the spring, maybe a drumming event, and also we're working on an activity backpack, which is a reusable backpack for families to use at the museum, and there's one activity we're thinking about collaborating with the Cape Cod Cape Verdean Museum on that. So. But
it seems that then you're very concerned about the Museum on the Green museums being, the mission being inclusive.
Oh, yes, absolutely, yes. We got to include everyone's history.
Yes, yeah. And then speaking about connections with other institutions, something pretty exciting is coming up with the Falmouth Artist Center.
Yes, so I had a conversation with Laura Reckford, who's the executive director over at Falmouth Art Center, a few months back, and she told me, of course, I'm going around meeting different people in town. She told me about what they all do, and that they have really living artists, right? And of course, most of the artists that I've been involved with over the course of my career have been dead for a few hundred years. But I thought about what if we did a nice collaboration. At the Falmouth Historical Society, we have a beautiful collection of mourning art with a U. These were art, usually silk embroidery done after the loss of a loved one, and it's a teenage girl. Yeah, it's a teenage girl kind of showing off her needlepoint skill, but it's a real act of devotion and love to a lost loved one. And you see imagery coming out in this time period of like weeping willows, urns, kind of the classical imagery. Yeah, Jane Austen time period.
I see.
And we have a collection of 4 done during the early 19th century. And what I talked about with Laura is essentially looking at these bodies of works and having living artists involved with the Art Center come and look at them, and then doing their own modern day interpretation of the piece. And so we are going to do that in April at the Falmouth Art Center. So that'll be fun. That is going
to be so interesting.
Yeah.
A real look at how a culture, including the way people mourn, how our culture has changed, or how, in many ways, how it has not changed.
Yeah.
That should be so interesting.
It really should be, and of course we'll tell all the stories behind the mourning art. And it's interesting, these girls all knew each other in life, too.
And you have their names?
Oh, yeah. And some of the names are on their pieces, which, for example, Love Shiverick, Love lost her brother, and it's interesting. So Love grew up and married a man by the name of Silas Jones, and their house still exists today. It's Tommy's place.
Oh, yes.
And I think that that's a really interesting conversation around loss, where tying into modern day, here Love was creating you know, this really devotional piece.
Yes.
And then later on, her home becomes a place that is a place, you know, of remembrance and, you know, celebrating the time you have with someone.
And so individual artists at who work at the center,
Yes.
art center, are going to produce their own works, and and this is going to be sometime in April.
It is. During the month of April, there'll be an exhibition opening, and it should be really lovely. And the artists all work in different mediums, so glass, ceramics. So it'll be very interesting to see what they come up with, and it'll be, you know, put next to the piece, so with some explanation.
Yes, wonderful. I can't wait.
Yes.
And but now, the buildings, how many buildings do we have on Main Street that people can enter, not during the winter, but when you're open, when the museums are open, that they can look at exhibits?
Okay, our campus on Palmer Ave? Yeah. So we have 4 buildings that have exhibits in them. Yes, we have Conant House, which is from 1730, but it was remodeled in 2016. It has exhibits in there. We have the 1790s Wicks House, which is more of a traditional historic house museum. We have a display in the Hallett Barn. This particular exhibition we have on right now is Cash Creditor Eels. And yes, and it essentially looks at a gentleman by the name of Toby. His last name is Toby, and him and his wife are taking a fictional trip downtown and kind of bartering and showing how you could buy things with other than money, and that's set in the 1820s. And then we have a rotating exhibition space in our cultural center.
Oh, so seeing those exhibits at the Hallett Barn would be such fun. I think about the eel as an early example of what might have been what has become Bitcoin. Some way, yeah, yes, the eel as unregulated cash.
I think that's a great way of making the past present, yeah.
Yes, yes. And all these buildings, of course, the Wick House, particularly, the buildings, of course, must be enormously expensive in terms of upkeep, because buildings weather.
Yes,
they need
the harsh New England climate, right? Well, thank you for bringing that up, Barbara, because that is obviously always a concern for a small nonprofit, a historical society. And so the Wicks House in particular needs a little bit of TLC. It is essentially the crowning jewel of the town green. 1790s house, very interesting architectural details. Unfortunately, right now it does not have climate control. We need to redo the windows. There's a lot of environmental concerns with that building, and so hopefully we'll be getting, you know, a campaign to help restore the building so we can you know, create more exhibit space and preserve this really important building for the town's history. Dr. Francis Wicks was a very important gentleman here in Falmouth. He was one of the earliest doctors to do the smallpox inoculation. He helped found the town poorhouse. Ironically, due to a series of unfortunate events, his only child, his daughter, would become a resident of the poorhouse later on in her life, and his grandchildren.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, what does the Historical Society do for funding then?
Yes, so we rely on the generosity of the community. We do have a membership program, and that really helps us along. We have 2 appeals, a spring appeal and the end of the year appeal. We do get some grant funding and some family foundation funding, but essentially it's up to us every year to make this all work. And that can be challenging.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they're so important. There are concrete examples of history, and not only educational but fun.
Yes.
It's also, I see them as recreational too for the people in Falmouth. So I want to thank you very much for coming here and talking about the museums on the green. And we want to remind viewers that on the 8th of November. You will have this Zoom presentation. And also, the website is very full of information, listing some of the untold stories that people can read, and also places where they can register for some of the walks that are coming up.
Absolutely. Our website is full of information on anything from our walks, our collection, to even how you want to become a member, or planned giving, thinking about legacy, things like that as well.
And some history too of the museums on the Green and the Falmouth Historical Society. That's very interesting.
Yes, oldest historical society on Cape Cod.
Really?
Yes,
really?
yes, 1900 when everything kind of kicked off here.
Let's tell viewers what the website is, www.
Yeah, FalmouthMuseumsOnTheGreen.org.
Okay, FalmouthMuseumsOnTheGreen.org. Well, thank you so much for being here and telling us about this, all these wonderful exhibits and lectures and walks that are coming up that people can enjoy.
Thank you, Barbara. Happy to be here.
Yes. Yeah. And viewers, thank you very much for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you next time on Conversations with Barbara.